Hello and welcome. This is Lita Downs from the Center for Faculty Excellence, and I would like to welcome you to today's offering, From Rogers to Skinner, Understanding Your Role in Building Healthy Relationships with Doctoral Mentees. This session was originally presented at the Walden University 2019 Winter National Faculty Meeting in Tampa, Florida. Our presenters, Dr. Sherry Toledo and Dr. Amy White, are here with us again today. And at this point, I'm going to turn things over to them. Welcome.
Hi, Lita. Thank you so much. This is Sherry Toledo and
Amy White.
Amy White. I am the academic coordinator for the PhD programs EDD, EDS in educational technology and learning, instruction, and innovation. Always a full mouthful. And Amy
is the academic coordinator for curriculum instruction, assessment, reading, and special education in the master's programs, and I serve on about 30 doctoral committees.
Whew, I know, she's my go-to person. All right. Well, we wanted to share with you, and thank you so much for being here with us because we're both really passionate about this and we want to share what we've learned over time. And we want to be able to give you some tools to walk away with. So first of all, we're hoping that you will better understand your mentoring philosophy. And we would like to apologize to you psychologists and psychology purists because we're just going to dabble in the psychological here and in the theories. We'd also like to help you articulate or show you the issues that arise from certain philosophical mismatches or mismatches of approaches with mentees and mentors in the way that they approach the dissertation process. And last, we want to propose for you pathways to working and forwarding your mentoring relationships. So you might ask, how in the world did they come up with this stuff? Well, Amy and I were meeting with a faculty member, and we found that with this person's background, they were more interested in working on the relationship than moving the student through the prospectus. And little light bulbs started coming on in my head, like bing, bing, bing. This is that mismatch that we just talked about. So we put together kind of a look at a variety of theorists and approaches. And I have a background in counseling, in being a counselor, and being counseled. So all these theorists started coming to mind and the different ways of working with people. And we felt that that would be a great starting point for this discussion. So Amy's turn.
So
we're both clicking.
So we got off that phone call, and it really just occurred to us, we need to talk about that one student. You know, if you're listening to this, I'd encourage you to think about that student. You know, the one that is difficult, the one who, when their email address pops up in your box, you just go, oh, I just don't know if I can read that today. Because for some reason, you've just not found the golden key to moving them forward and having a healthier, productive mentoring relationship with them. So mentoring is really hard. It's hard to help someone write a dissertation when you can meet with them regularly, much less when you are millions of miles, thousands of miles, hundreds of miles away and working exclusively online. Students, we've discovered sort of in our work with them, have this path along the dissertation. And sometimes we forget that they start as I call them kindergarten dissertation writers, because they really are at the very beginning, having been through a bunch of courses and maybe read a dissertation doesn't really prepare them for the nitty-gritty details of writing a dissertation. they have to not only complete original research, but they have to learn how to complete original research while they're doing original research. So it really can have a lot of conflict both in their mind and in their relationships with their mentor. I often refer to them as ESL students, English as a second language students, because really they are learning a new language. They know how to speak and write academic, but they don't know how to speak and write scholar unless they've already got a doctorate. And then, heavens, who would do that twice? So that's a big opportunity for growth, but also a big opportunity for conflict and for stress. So this session is really all about that one student that confounds you, the one that makes you cringe, the one that you just can't figure out how to move them forward. And that's really where we're coming from today. This definition of mentoring is certainly not all-inclusive. You can find many, many definitions. I like this one because I love that constellation of activities that goes beyond advising or guiding, because there's no real linear manual for mentoring. You can read articles, you can read books, but it's not all going to work on every student. And it's part of our responsibility that to mentor them, and but also help them find the other resources they need. There's no way we can be everything to our mentees. There's no way we can provide them every single thing they need, from hand-holding to academic guidance. So part of our mentoring role is to really understand where they're coming from and be able to adjust our approach with them and help them find other resources they need. So today's about that one student.
So let's start off. The first one, and I'm sure most of you, those of you that are in education, would recognize Erikson. The first kind of combination we wanted to look at is that Eriksonian approach with a little bit of Skinner. Now, Erikson, as you can see, is a developmental model. And that's really my approach. It's very developmental. That I try to make sure that the tasks I give them, even the freedom that I give them, aligns with where they are on a continuum, like you see for Erikson. So just like a kindergartner, I wouldn't give them a task that is really more appropriate for a middle schooler or even a high schooler or a college level student. And you know that you don't do that with your students either. You wouldn't expect your first quarter doctoral student to be doing the work that you see your last quarter doctoral students do. So appropriate tasks for the appropriate level of development that you find them at. The Skinner part is the goal setting part, that the tasks need to be very specific with very good deadlines and good consequences or bad consequences. One of our mentors, one of my faculty member, actually has his students in the term plan write the consequence and the reward when the student either finishes a task within the time frame or doesn't. And that's the Skinnerian part of Erikson. So these types of mentors are very task oriented. Like I said, goal setting is key, developmentally appropriate. I love this. We're growing successful researchers. I did a presentation with my students that were just starting out in the prospectus step, and told them that they were getting their driver's license in research. So while you have some that are kindergarten, and most of them, hopefully, like Amy said, unless they're doing another dissertation or another master's thesis, they are at a really low level. So something comes into play, and that is if you give them too much control or if you give them too much freedom, they're lost. They don't know what to do. So with like kids, sometimes they're going to act out. They're going to be angry, they're going to pout, you're going to not have any contact with them again. Because when they do have that, I don't know what I'm doing, they're, like I said, they're going to act out. So it's real important, as we said at the very beginning, that the relationship is built from this process. And if we're giving them little steps to complete, helping them chunk out the big steps, then that relationship builds that trust and confidence that we need to build.
And that really is important that we build that process through the relationship, that we start them out with things that they can handle and then move them into different phases. I mean, you're occasionally going to find one that kind of stays in that Erikson Skinner model for a long time, but hopefully we create, using that developmental model, we create some confidence, we create some trust between mentor and mentee, and then we can move on to a more Vygotskian approach, which is that zone of proximal development, where the distance between the actual development level as determined by independent problem solving is just a little out of their reach, right? We want to set the goal just a tiny bit out of their reach. We want to give them adult guidance, or in this case, mentor guidance, and collaborate with them. So really what that looks like in schools, we use a lot of the word scaffolding, like we give them little tasks and we build the next rung of the ladder and then we help them jump up to it. A Vygotskian mentor really will stretch them, will really help build on what hopefully we've developed in that first phase and stretch them till the next phase, giving them a little more responsibility and a little more freedom and creating some sort of community for them, for peer interaction, so that if your research forum, if you end up with one of those odd circumstances where you've only got one mentee in this forum and another one's in a different forum, I try to create opportunities through Collaborate or Skype or Zoom or whatever you can, where you can create a community for them. Encourage them to build their own learning community from other doctoral students. You are part of their community, but that's where collaboration can really start, when the tasks are less finite and you're stretching more into modeling, scaffolding. We begin to move from telling them what to do to asking them, how do you feel about this next step? Like, I think you can do this. Let's try it and then come back together. And in this step, dialogue is all the key. Trying to figure out where they are and if they're comfortable with that, and can you set them loose and then bring them back a little to determine if they really are on the right track.
So the next theorist or approach that we want to look at is Rogers. And Rogers is a pretty big leap. These are the basic constructs of Rogers that you can see. So a lot of empathy. I know that as my students get towards writing chapter 4 and 5, I do have a lot of empathy for them. The positive regard, the genuineness. This is where my relationship starts to change with them a little bit. And one caveat is that Amy and I both have the philosophy that we like them, not like them, but we really require that they call us Dr. White, Dr. Toledo, because at this stage, we want them to start seeing what it really takes to get that doctorate. And then I know Amy has said this several times, and I say it to mine, and it's so much fun when we get that final email from CAO that their degree has been conferred, that we write to them, dear so-and-so, by their doctor, dear Dr. so-and-so, and then we sign our first names. So it's kind of a rite to passage. And the reason I bring that up now is because when I get to this Rogerian stage in working with them, I really don't mind if they call me by my first name, because it really is that genuineness that comes out, and I see where they are, and I do have that positive regard for where they are. Not that I don't before, it's just that I feel the shift before they do, I think. So what would a Rogerian mentor look like? You know, like I said, I have a background in counseling, and Rogers, as a therapist, would open the door for the client and tell the client, have a seat, where many therapists would say, I'll sit here, you sit there. He opened the door from the very beginning, was non-directive. So you can see why at this stage, this has to come at a late stage. Our interactions with our mentees at this stage are very Socratic. Again, not that you can't use the Socratic questioning earlier, it's just that it's much more, as I said, student-driven. I have most of the time total confidence that my students are going to make the best decisions. And when they don't, I will ask them a question that guides them in that direction. You know, it's the student's choice, like I said, where to sit, where to begin. And we really have some good examples for you later on. So I don't want to be a spoiler, but I am going to go to the next stage. So the whole goal of this approach is to move them from high dependence to interdependence. In the middle, there's some independence. So there's some things that I do to set them out there independent of me. And that is that area right in the middle that you see strategic ambiguity. Now, this wasn't something that we had included in the Tampa presentation because it actually came out of one of my mentees' dissertations. And she had talked to close to 15 teachers of the year, national teachers of the year, and to the person, they use this idea of strategic ambiguity, where the student knows all of the processes, but they have to grapple with and wrestle with the content. And isn't that a great word picture? To me, it's a word picture of what goes on in the dissertation process. So as they move through that strategic ambiguity, they come to that interdependence where they can be independent, but they really have understood that the collaborative work is where most of the power is. Now, one more thing, and this came out actually, Amy and I were talking the other day, and we both have used this forever, but it's actually an old finding from a study from 1908 by Erikson Dodson. And I was sharing this with my faculty the other day, that we want to move them to the point where optimal performance is achieved. And that's where the anxiety and stress is in that midsection of that bell curve. So if there's not enough enough anxiety, they're bored and their motivation is low. If there's too much anxiety or stress, and boy, have we seen that, they're overloaded and melting down. And don't be surprised if they look like there's not enough anxiety. So they might look bored, and that could be that disguise for being overloaded. So helping them, giving them enough freedom, always giving them enough instruction to keep them in that middle zone where their anxiety and stress is just enough to motivate them to perform very, very well. All right. Handout time.
So we thought it might, handout time.
We thought it might just be useful
to
take some actual
student work
and
and
apply feedback
as
to
each of
different
these
ones.
different ones. So
In
the link, in the
materials
associated with the webinar, there is a link to a handout.
I'm going to show you
We're
that
going
in
to
just
show you that
a
in
second.
just a second.
But if you have trouble,
There we go.
there we go. If you have trouble getting it, please feel free to reach out. Our emails are on the slides. But you can see we did, just for fun, some comments in boxes as Skinner, like what would Skinner say? And those things are very directive, like reorganize this. do this, use this link to use the meal plan. I'm still seeing too much summary. What is this? Do it this way. And, very directive, but not critical, but directive, instructive. This is not correct. Here's a link, use it to correct it. And then moving on down, then you move into, more Erikson and more Vygotsky, where we see things like, this is okay. Why don't you consider improving your flow by doing this and then do that? It would improve the flow. Could you try and see if it makes a difference? We can talk about it next time. More Vygotsky, more stretching. Why don't you try this approach and then let's talk about it. See if you can integrate that into your writing. And of course, you get to the more Rogerian feedback, like, oh, this is one approach. How do you feel about that? What led you to choose a priori? So a very Socratic sort of pointing out the feedback you can tell, and when you look at the handout in detail, you can tell there's a marked difference in the way you give feedback to students in each of those phases of their journey, or students, and it's not a linear journey. Sometimes we get to that overload section and I have to pop back to Erikson for a while and say, yeah, don't do that, do this. Here's what's going to happen. You're overwhelmed. We're going to take chapter 2. I want you to take 6 through 10. I want you to do these pages, and then I want you to make me to call me, and we're going to go over it. Sometimes they're taking it and they're flying with it, and then we have to go back to Skinner/Erikson. Right? It's not a linear journey necessarily. Right. They do progress through it, but that doesn't mean you won't have to go back and say, okay, stop, pause. We have hit the rails. I feel your stress. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to do exactly what I say, exactly how I say it, until you feel better. And when we get over that bump, then we'll negotiate what our next step is. And sometimes that's really, you don't want to say, okay, well, it's their dissertation. If that's the way they want to do it, yeah, okay. But sometimes you have to say, okay, stop. This is not getting us anywhere. You're getting in your head. I need you to get out of your head, and I'm going to send you a list. I want you to do everything on that list in that order, and I want you to do it by Friday at 5 p.m., and then I want you to call me. Sometimes we have to go back in order to go forward, if that makes any sense. So that feedback handout, if you can get it, or if you can get it out of the presentation, or if you need to email us, it's just for fun, but I think it's a really fun way to think about, wow, what is my feedback style? Do I have a student in Erikson and I'm giving them Roger's feedback? So sometimes I have to shift. We all have a feedback style, and that's fine, but maybe I have to shift the way I give feedback through time and over time with each mentee. Alita, if you can pop us back to the slides. So yeah, there's just a summary of what you'll find in a handout, but it really is important that you discuss with students. Look, if the feedback doesn't make sense to you, let me know. I can try and give you feedback in a different manner. Yeah, I have a style. I have a very distinct style of feedback, and for the most part, I stay in my style. But sometimes I have to really put the microscope on me and say, just don't think they're getting the way I'm telling them to do it. I've told them 3 times. I don't think they're intentionally ignoring me. I think they don't get it. So let me think about how I could say that in a different style that might resonate more.
Yeah, I think sometimes you're right. And I love that example, because I was just thinking about how we get them through a certain place in the process. And I think this applies to teaching any content or any process. And we forget. So let's talk chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we get them through prospectus, or we get them through chapter 1, and then realize chapter 2 is a different set of skills. Chapter 3 is a different set of skills. So we have to go back, like you said, circle back and, make sure that they have the skills that they need, using Skinner and Erikson and Vygotsky. And really, Rogers really doesn't come to play until the end of that skill set. So when they're at the end of what they've needed to learn to do those tasks, that's when it's more Rogerian. And then as you move through, so I really like that. It's kind of it's really an up and down. And along with that, and I really want to go back to this slide. Along to that, I don't know if you can see my cursor, probably not, but I'm looking at that optimal performance area, and you can sense they're falling into that overload or low performance. So that's such good stuff. We like this. We do.
Well, and I really feel like it's made a difference. I feel like some of it, because we work with so many doctoral students, we've done just sort of innately. But when you and I started having the conversation about being
Yes.
intentional, about defining some of these things, I think it changed the way I mentored.
Yeah, me too. So I'll take the left side. You can take the right side.
Okay.
So just as far as knowing them, so knowing you, knowing them, I'm going to do the knowing them part first. Establishing open lines of communication. Are you a telephone user? Are you a Skype user? Do you use the chat in Blackboard? Open dialogues about styles in yours. So when you first meet with them or they first meet with you, am I asking them what style do they use? Ask them, yes. Adjusting and adapting, like Amy just said. So we've hit a wall. I haven't heard from this student in like 3 weeks. I require that they contact me every 2 weeks. I haven't heard from them. So I need to know also when to teach. I love that. When to teach and when to mentor. I think a lot of mentors forget that we're still instructing the process. And then mentoring, I'm using one of the other approaches other than direct instruction to work with them.
Yeah, and that's just really important. They are used to going through these very structured classes with it's due by Wednesday at noon and Sunday at midnight and Wednesday at noon and Sunday at midnight. Here's the rubric, here's the template, do this. And then we throw them into a course with a prospectus, and then we go, okay, well, here's the link to the templates and the checklists. Look, it seems like some of us want to stop teaching them at that point and just guide them through the dissertation. And there's occasionally going to be a student that just rocks on. They just get it. Like they have just coalesced all that knowledge and they are ready to go. And that's great. But sometimes you have to drop back and go, okay, they really don't understand how to write a literature review. That's a skill. I'm going to have to teach that skill before I can let them have some independence in that chapter.
Yes.
So just, knowing them, knowing their strengths and weaknesses, and knowing how you like to work is important. So we want to most of all thank you for listening all the way through. We think this is really interesting stuff, but also really important for especially that one student that we started with in the beginning, that one student that I just can't figure out. And it's really important to think about where is that mismatch? What is not getting through? So I hope that you'll just pause for a moment and think about what you learn about yourself. Because I know even though, I have had as many as 60 doctoral students at one time. So I do this a lot. And even still, just the conversations that Sherry and I have had around this stuff, I've thought, oh, okay, I get that. I can see a student in my head. I need to go back and fix something with them. So what did you learn about yourself? And what do you believe about that mentoring relationship? Where do you fall in that spectrum of both teaching and mentoring and your feedback style? How does what we've said today align with how you already mentor? Is there anything you heard today? If you stuck us out all the way to the end, hooray! Which of these things would be most useful for you? And can you think of just one change? Because we're all teachers, right? So we know that we don't learn anything new if we don't stop and reflect on that learning. So we just love for you to take a second at the end here and reflect on what's one thing that made that light bulb or gave you a small aha moment that you might try with your mentees. And we just hope that there was something that resonated with you that you think might really help that one student.
As you're talking, it just occurred to me that we just modeled the process that we're talking about. We started out teaching, and then we started out giving help, and now we've left it with you, the participants here, people that are viewing, on what you're going to do with it. Oh, that's so fun.
Getting chilled.
So you can see that it really is part of who we are and the way that we work towards things.
It really is, and I hope that something we've said today has helped you. Here's our email addresses on the final screen. If you can't access the handout, we'd be glad to pop it to you. And we just hope that something here has been meaningful to you, and we really appreciate you sticking with us. Thanks for attending and listening.
Thank you for being here.